Welcome to episode number 2 of the Growth Theory Optimal podcast. My name's Bill King. I will be your host today and every other time after this. My first guest is Alex Birkett. Alex is the growth and experimentation lead at Workato, and he was previously on the growth team at Hubspot, focusing on user acquisition. Alex is an amazing marketer and someone I consider a friend. I'm really impressed by all the stuff that he's been working on. On this episode, Alex breaks down what it's like to be a full-time head of experimentation, the role experimentation and testing plays in the growth process, what data and insights he actually looks for when he thinks about how to succeed with experimentation. Not only is Alex doing that, but he also just launched his own agency along with another friend, David Ly Khim, called Omniscient, where they're actually helping B2B software companies accelerate growth through conversion-driven content marketing. Before we get in the conversation, I just want to say if you could please like, subscribe, and do all the things that help the podcast get found, it would be really helpful. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 2 with Alex Birkett.
We all gotta grow, this is not optional. That's why we need to start the show. Growth theory optimal. Growth is full of obstacles, spark a hypothesis. You gotta play your hand, don't just wait and be an optimist. And now it's time to know what growth theory is. Let's build. Bill King, host of the show, here he is. We going all in, we unstoppable. Check it out, this is Growth Theory Optimal. You're checking out the Growth Theory Optimal podcast with your host, Bill King.
Do you want me to try to stay on topic, or do you mind if I go off and do?
Dude, I was like, we're going down the rabbit hole, and I can't wait to see what's at the bottom. That's what that's where this conversation's going.
Well, luckily, it's very difficult to predict what that is. So
exactly, I know. I'm like, why are we talking about Whole Foods at the end of the podcast? I don't know what's going on. All right, Alex Birkett, somebody who I just met about 2 years ago on the podcast today, but I'm a big fan of Alex Birkett. What a great guy. You have done a lot of things in the growth world. You started as a marketing manager. You started in like the digital space in 2012. That was before you moved to Austin, right?
Yeah. So some of that was like when I was in college, I acted as the manager for like Arctica Race, which is an e-commerce company. That was kind of still when I was stumbling around, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to get into marketing and probably the tech space. So those were kind of early experiences.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do, Alex. So then you had I think we talked before, but I think one of the roles that like probably changed the trajectory of your career probably was the opportunity to be in a growth marketing manager at CXL, which I think was a big influence in your career probably. Then you went from there to still doing growth, but focusing on user acquisition at HubSpot. You were doing SEO, CRO, and content, which is the holy trinity, I guess you could say, in acquisition. And then you started Omniscient recently with David Ly Khim, which is awesome, and we'll get into that, which is basically an agency that helps people acquire customers through content marketing. And now you're at Workato, and you're doing a full-time experimentation role where you actually own experimentation, which is pretty sweet. I think I hear the idea of experimentation all the time. And it's very rare, I think, that you see someone who just does that full time. So we'll get into that. First of all, like, how did this evolution happen? Because it sounds like we've talked about this offline, but I feel it sounds like we've both had relatively like similar kind of paths going from one role to the next role to the next role. And like they were somewhat different, but they were all unique in their own ways, like challenging. You were in marketing manager, growth marketing manager, user acquisition, experimentation. How did all this happen? And like, how did this path become what it is? And like, what were the inspirations that you picked up along the way as your career has evolved?
Yeah, I don't plan things out super well. There's this concept that I recently learned called Panzer versus a planner. So in writing, like if you're writing a novel, like some people fly by the seat of their pants, they're a pantser. If they plan everything ahead, character development, plot, everything, that's a planner. So I've typically been a pantser, but I do fly by principles and kind of general things that I want. So I move towards those macro directions through whatever opportunities that come up, sort of through optionality, as like Nassim Taleb would put it. So let me try to frame this from the beginning. Let me go back to my roots. Have you heard of this game called We're Not Really Strangers?
No.
Okay, so this is, it's not really a game, like a board game in the sense that like Monopoly or something is. It's really like a conversation starter. So like there's all these prompts, like truth or dare type things, then like basically like questions that you ask each other. And I was recently on a trip with some friends and we were kind of playing this to pass time on the car ride. And one of the questions was like, what did you want to be when you grew up, or like when you were a little kid? And I started thinking back, and obviously like there's these crazy things that you're like, oh, I want to be a baseball player, or, you know, I want to be like a rock star or something like that, which I still, you know, kind of want to be, but I think the feasibility is running out. But when I look back and truly think like, all right, when I was really young, what inclinations did I have that seemed natural? It's like there's the cliche, like, you know, you start the lemonade stand. I did that. I started the lemonade stand with my little brother when I was a little kid. But then I started like a little store when I was in third grade with a friend of mine, where we sold kind of T-shirts and trinkets to friends. And then I discovered Cafe Press, where you could actually make T-shirt designs and sell them online. So I got my first e-commerce check in like 7th grade. Not huge, but it was something where I learned that I could do this.
You can get some desserts when you're in middle school or whatever age that is.
That's, I could buy like
win.
extra Snickers candy bars at lunch or something. But yeah, I trace all this stuff, and I'm like, man, I have been starting and building things from 0 to 1 since the beginning, and I've kind of always looked at entrepreneurship as the path that was for me. It's kind of difficult, like coming from a small town, thinking about how you actually crack into that. Like, I never knew tech entrepreneurs when I was a kid. I mean, I think that's also like more of an emerging trend where that's been democratized. But through college, I realized I wanted to get into that and eventually like build my own things. Like, I was really into independence and freedom, flexibility. I didn't want to be chained down to a location or a set of hours. And back then, it was kind of like entrepreneurship was the way to do that. So I remember reading 4-Hour Workweek and a bunch of books, you know, in that kind of vein. So my first job was out of college was a lawn starter. So I deliberately wanted to work at a very, very early stage company, and they were as early stage as you could feasibly get without founding it yourself. So they just graduated from the Techstars incubator program, and I joined pre-seed with just the founders. So I was like, you know, employee number 1, and we had like a MVP of the product, and we were trying to get product market fit, and, you know, figuring out sales and customer success, and basically every part of the business. So that was kind of foundational in how I looked at like business building, because they went on to raise a bunch of venture capital as well. But in terms of the marketing adventure, that started at CXL. So I studied journalism, didn't really know a ton about the quantitative arts outside of like the few, you know, statistics for social sciences type classes that I had to take. But CXL was a blog that I always followed, you know, after reading about Sean Ellis and kind of the growth hackers and that whole world. Andrew Chen, I read his blog. I got really interested in the idea of like the quantitative, the data-driven, the experimentation stuff, and the opportunity to join CXL as like a content/growth marketer, where I would be, you know, it's like this framework of like 1 foot in the know and 1 foot in the unknown. So like I knew I could write, but I didn't know the other stuff. So I joined CXL, and I felt like that was kind of a data-driven graduate school for me of sorts. Like I was paid to learn all these cool things like analytics and A/B testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I think we've talked about this before, but I also started. I was in school for journalism, and then had a blog, was writing about stuff, and I was like, "Why is nobody finding my content? I think it's pretty good. Is there some reason for this?" And went down the rabbit hole of learning the analytics as well. It sounds like we both share this kind of like enthusiasm for learning. So once you find something that's got a system that you can deploy a strategy around it, you just go down the rabbit hole until you eventually find the bottom, or we're still tumbling down that rabbit hole, still trying to find the bottom. But
didn't I ask you that in our podcast too about like, I felt like you go down rabbit holes easily, right? Like you get interested in something and then you start reading and watching YouTube, and then 3 months later you find yourself an expert in some esoteric new hobby.
Yeah, that's totally it. And like I followed a similar path where I was like, okay, how do you get content to be found? And then, oh, wait a second, nobody's converting once they get there. Oh, it turns out you have to actually put a reason for somebody to convert and all these things. And so now it looks like, you know, outdated information, but it was probably the most exciting time of my maturation in my career, was like just learning and kind of being able to test those new things and go through that process. So, that's amazing. First of all, you've gone through a lot of different roles, and so you're kind of building a skill set that is in high demand right now. And I don't think there's a lot of people who do both content, experimentation, like all the different arts of marketing. A lot of teams have a person who owns maybe some experiments. What does a full-time experimentation person do? Where does it sit inside the team? Do you have like a growth org, and experimentation is a unit inside that growth org? And like, how did this come about?
This is a new role, so I've only been in it for 2 months. So I can't say, you know, this is going to be like a shallow answer of sorts, because I'm still learning myself. But it sits on the marketing org, on the growth team, and primarily works on paid acquisition and website optimization, which is, semantically the same as like a conversion rate optimization position. Now, this expands eventually because there's also roles on the growth team that include, SDR email sequences. And then beyond that, there's like product, and like Workato is not necessarily like, product led, and that you can go sign up like self-serve, but there's still onboarding, there's still retention, there's still upsell and cross-sell stuff that eventually is going to be encompassed by growth and experimentation as well. Now, what it looks like is basically just the data-driven growth process, right? There's still research, ideation, hypotheses, prioritization, execution or experimentation, and analysis. And then you kind of go back and loop through that system. And you have weekly meetings where you report on results of what happened, what you're currently working on, and what you're planning next. And hopefully, like, you iterate and improve and get incremental gains over time. And some of those big wins pay off for like all the efforts. But yeah, it's essentially just statistical tinkering.
I'm curious. So, how do you define success as the person who owns experimentation? Is it, if I said, "Hey, Alex, you did a fantastic job. We talk again another year," and you get promoted, are you responsible for the overall top line revenue number, or like, do you have specific KPIs that you're looking at to understand how experimentation impacts all those things? Because I would imagine from a data side of things, like, we know that Alex is doing all these phenomenal experiments to help reduce friction, but there's a lot of things that go on in the funnel that it could influence that. Like, how does that work when you have those conversations with the person you roll up to? Like, how do you guys talk about those things?
Yeah, the ROI of conversion rate optimization is one of the most difficult questions, because it's like, if you're dealing with a proportion, you obviously have like the numerator and the denominator. So if like you increase the traffic via anything, if you get like you raise a round and you get in TechCrunch or something like that, or you have an article go viral on Hacker News, or you're throwing a conference and like you get a bunch of direct traffic that not necessarily is like going to convert, you have more people and not necessarily a higher conversion rate. So you might actually lower the conversion rate but do nothing wrong. So I think proportion metrics are always difficult and slightly misleading. So there obviously has to be context, but then there's this trade-off between like utility and accuracy. So like the closer you get to the truth, like the more complex you're typically going to get. That's the case when you're building growth models. That's the case when you're designing machine learning algorithms. Like, there's always a bias versus variance trade-off. It's like at the start, we're aiming for simplicity, and we're using a conversion rate metric where we establish baselines over the past couple quarters. We see the standard deviation, the potential variance there, and map out potential trends and what we would be happy with in the next couple quarters. And then we assume that there's not going to be any drastic changes in terms of like, traffic allocation or targeting. It's a big assumption though, right? There theoretically could be in a Series D startup especially.
Sure.
So we're trying to increase conversion rates week over week, month over month, and quarter over quarter, and we have goals based on the website as well as paid acquisition. Now, in the future, what I want to do is try to parse out incrementality, and you could do that various ways. There's like holdout sets, so you basically like optimize for 90% or 95% of the audience, or 99 or whatever that proportion is, and then keep 1 to 5% of the audience on like whatever old, original, untouched version there is, and then you can sort of parse out like what the incremental gains your program has produced. There's also ways that you can do that on kind of this is a looser, more messy way, but you can basically take like your wins, your percentage win rate, and then like how much they won by, and sort of like add those up. Although, sometimes those gains don't sustain. So that's a difficult way as well. So this is a very difficult question, especially when you start going into forecasting like revenue gains from an experimentation program, which sometimes are not illusory, but sometimes they don't transpire in the way that they do in your Google optimized platform.
Right.
So there's actually a cool series that David Mannheim is putting out on LinkedIn now. I think if you search like revenue attribution CRO, yeah, it's a difficult problem. I mean, as it is with SEO and anything, right? Metrics are like the hardest part.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so like you've probably been working on you're relatively new, but are there like for the folks listening who might be saying, "Ooh, that sounds cool, but it's also a little bit confusing," can you give any example of just an experiment that you've run recently and kind of like how you approach that problem, just so people can get context for what exactly you just said?
Yeah. So, well, we're kind of undergoing some interesting stuff right now. We're working on bigger projects that aren't necessarily like tactical UI experiments, but we're doing big projects. Like we're The go-to-market for Workato is essentially you request a demo or a trial and you get passed to sales, and then you get basically put into the product via like a sales-led motion. There's an interest in product-led stuff, but not necessarily freemium because the product is so complex and there's so many use cases. So there's kind of this intermediary that a lot of product-ish led companies are doing, where it's like you give them an interactive product tour. You can see this on Pendo. I think HubSpot actually has one as well, where you can go in and click around, and it's this like just the HTML and CSS of a product, but it's not in the product itself. You don't need to sign up to see that. So that's a big project that we're working on. And then incrementally through that, like if we see that it works on an aggregate level, if it overall like increases the conversion rate of people who, see that, especially on the homepage, if we put it there, then the incrementality and kind of the micro optimization comes in the form of like, what steps of the product do we show? There's maybe 10 or 12 kind of steps in this sequence of like product slides. It's like, how do we shorten that? Do we lengthen that? Do we reverse the order and show the advanced features first and the simple features later? Do we change the messaging? And then we can kind of optimize people through that funnel where we start, maybe 1,000 people start the product tour and 10 get to the end and, one signs up for a demo. This is just, throwing numbers out there. But then like, how do we get 1,000 people in and then like, 500 people finishing it and then more and more like completing demos. So that would be like one level of thinking in terms of like micro optimization.
Right.
And then apart from that, what we're doing on paid acquisition on landing pages is really just like diving into our messaging, which I think is really difficult for most companies, but especially for an automation company. It's like anybody can use automation. Like there's no, like it's not like for email marketers or for HR teams, or literally anybody could use this. So we're doing winter tests. So this is PEP, has CXL PEP.
Yeah, I think I've heard of it. Yep.
They do like user testing, but for messaging. So you get like a panel of your target audience, and they basically you give them like a landing page or a website, and they give you feedback, specific things that you can improve, things that are unclear, motivations, hesitations, all that stuff. So we're doing qualitative research to inform like new messaging. So we may test some value propositions, we may test some subheaders. May test some like benefits versus kind of features copy in the page, but that's another big kind of like project that we're doing a lot of different experiments within.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating what you just said, because oftentimes people think about growth, they think about like more of like a consumer application where it's, you've got an app, you've got a bunch of paid ads, and there's a few steps, and so you're micro optimizing every nth degree of that funnel. But it sounds like the funnel at Workato is actually quite a little bit more sort of like complex in the sense that you have to be able to zoom out, zoom in on those specific areas of the funnel where you think that you have the highest leverage. So I guess I'm really curious. So one thing that I've really enjoyed about our conversations is I think you do a really good job of doing exactly that, zooming out, zooming in. Like, here's the big picture. My job is to increase the conversion rate, and here are the specific silos that I can influence. So take me through kind of like how does experimentation work within the larger picture of growth? And tell me a little bit more about how you work cross-functionally with your team and the whole process y'all go through. Does it all trickle down from the go-to-market process, or is this more of like, hey, go spot specific areas in the funnel and just try to increase leverage as much as possible? Like, how does the process go from A to Z for experimentation?
Yeah, again, this is something that I'm kind of revamping in terms of the process, but how it works in terms of what we focus on is going to be, that SLA between the sales and marketing org, and essentially like to hit numbers for expectation, like, it's still a startup. So there's like all these growth expectations to like, get to the next round or the next level. So that's going to lead with like the sales kind of close rates, like based on like, all right, here's how many meetings are booked. Here's how many of those on average become sales. And here's how many, or here's how much the average sale is worth. So then you track backwards and say, all right, to get to those numbers, like how many demos do we need total? Like, because then, you can do the conversion rate between like on average, how many demos you get and how many meetings are booked from those demos. So then you just track back and say, all right, here's how many demos the growth team, the demand gen team is actually, in charge of. This would be like our expectation. Here's our stretch goal. And then you sort of break that down. And this is through the growth model, which is like the cornerstone document of any growth team. You're mapping out the inputs, the outputs, the expectations, and how you can sort of impact different levers. So there's different channels. There's paid, there's organic, there's all kinds of different things going on. There's SDRs, et cetera, et cetera. So then experimentation is functionally going to sit in with those teams, kind of embedded, within paid across all these different teams, and figure out which motions we can use to like have the highest impact in terms of like, if paid conversion rates are lower than average, like, we're going to focus on paid acquisition heavily that quarter. But it's always going to be shifting. But we're essentially like the plumbers of the growth world. We're going to go into the area that needs the most work and try to diagnose the problems, come up with hypotheses for how we can fix them, and sort of quantitatively design experiments that say, yes, this did work, this didn't work, this is the optimal way, or this isn't the optimal way. But we're always going to lead with the kind of strategic business priorities and the highest impact areas, which comes from the growth model.
Of course, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was really fascinated about when I was thinking about what to ask you was like, so in order to get to a full-time experimentation person, like I'm sure there's people that are listening right now that are like, wow, it'd be sweet to be able to have that like on my team. Do you have a sense for what the wins were, or like what the culture was like previous to you joining that allowed them to be able to say, or just justify the idea of having a full-time person who's just focusing on experimentation? Like, what was it like previous, and how did those conversations go when you met the team? Because I'm really curious, like, did you look up and say, oh, I'm looking for just a full-time CRO thing? Or was this more like organic? They were like, hey, listen, we've got these problems in the funnel and here's how I can help. Or tell me a little bit more about that, because I'm sure there has to be a previous culture in order for you to get to a full-time experimentation role. I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, they reached out to me about a totally different role, and I think they actually opened this one up because I just went off and I was such a nerd about A/B testing that they're like, just make this guy a full-time A/B tester. So I don't know if they had planned it fully, but I know that especially around the stage, like with a lot of companies, you're kind of going from this position of being a lot of brilliant execution people, a lot of brilliant implementers, to kind of scaling up in terms of process and specialties. So this is happening across multiple orgs at Workato. If you're anywhere in that series B through D, potentially E, it really is more of a function of the culture and possibly the employee count. You're going to find yourself with tons of siloed work, tons of ad hoc work that's all brilliant and quickly done, but you're going to find that there's not a lot of sharing, there's not a lot of visibility, and there's not a lot of communication. So as the company grows, as the customers grow, as the revenue grows, you need more of that structure, that formality and process. So if I had to say like the biggest value that I'm adding is probably bringing things together more cohesively instead of like doing random experiments, which there was a lot of experimentation going on before. It was just done in silos and ad hoc. Somebody who's working on paid would run a paid experiment. There would be not as much prioritization going into it. It would just be like a random idea. I think me coming in brings some sort of texture and some sort of like cross-functional reference point to say, all right, here's actually the biggest. I've talked to the growth team. I've talked to all these different teams. Here's the initiatives. Here's the themes that we're going to work on, and then here's the prioritization model, the meeting structure, the artifacts that we need to shift ideas upwards in the prioritization model. And here's how we're going to like run them, and at what cadence, and like what kind of input goals we want. We want to increase our experiment tempo from like 4 per week to 8 per week or something like that. Again, made up numbers, but having a centerpiece like that allows you to focus more on the program level. And still allow individual contributors to focus on generating great ideas and pulling together great customer insights and research to come up with those ideas. But then you need somebody to kind of cohesively bring it all together, in order to scale. Otherwise, it's always just going to be sort of an experiment here and there that doesn't ever connect to the bigger mission.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said is really interesting because in my experience, there have been either functional silos where there are just random people working on experiments. Like in previous roles, I've worked in usually acquisition side of business, but as a function of owning the number, I had to run experiments and I had to try to increase leverage as much as possible. But I do love the idea of having somebody who owns that thing, because it not only does it make it easier for you to do these, deploy these at the organization, because you're the experiment guy. Your job is to help them increase leverage, et cetera. That's just easier to be able to do those bigger, hairier experiments. But it's also, I think it's really neat because it brings together the different teams a lot more than they probably would have had they just without having a full-time experiment person. Because in order for you to get those big wins, would you agree that a lot of the bigger ones are cross-functional and they are usually the ones that are sort of like avoided because they are a little bit more difficult to implement? Has that been your experience so far? Or?
Yeah, it's hard to say what the impact is because I actually think that, it depends how much traffic you have and how much statistical power you can actually, warrant. But I do think cheap experiments that have outsized results are probably the best case scenario, because sometimes you are going to invest a lot in like a complex idea that may have a lot of justification and it's going to fail, and that's essentially going to be a sunk cost. So I don't necessarily know that that's true in all cases, but I do know that it is a limiting barrier in many teams. So to not be able to do complex or interesting cross-functional experiments is just like a functional limiting thing that it's, you're going to be stuck with copy tests and stuck with CTA tests forever. So you're going to hit like a local maximum on your program. So yeah, I definitely think that's true. And having somebody that can communicate and like, it's their job to like unblock the team in terms of like making those things happen. I think that is pretty powerful. And just like the visibility function, like you send a monthly email update with like the experiment results. You own the meeting. You have meetings cross-functionally, and you kind of evangelize and educate on experimentation. That's like a unique function, and it's hard to fit that into your day if you're doing all kinds of other things. So I think I actually learned this at HubSpot, like having just a person to go to when you have a question about a certain thing is actually pretty important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because if everybody owns it, then, knowledge transfers are harder. Oftentimes people get pulled in a million different directions. So if the guy who does paid owns, experiments for paid, they have a lot more on their plate. And so maybe they don't see them fully through. And like you said before, there's a lot of the internal stuff you have to deal with.
They're also not talking to the website experiment person, and they're not talking to the email experiment person, and they're not talking to the product experiment person. So they've got all these backlogs and spreadsheets and like prioritization matrices, but nobody's communicating. So they're running duplicate experiments. They're not sharing knowledge and coming up with iterative gains and incremental kind of knowledge accumulation. So like there's all these limiting factors when you're just dealing with silos like that.
Makes sense. So something as we've been going through this conversation that makes me excited is this sounds awesome. Everybody loves to run experiments. It's great to learn. Like, okay, you're day one at, a random company, and you've been hired as the person who owns experiments. Where do you go? Like, how does you go from 0 to 1 on, first of all, approaching experiments? What are the things you look for? And how would you approach running experimentation for a random company? Like, what is the Alex Birkett playbook? Like, how do you go into this process when you're starting at a brand new company?
Well, the first thing you do if you're doing consulting or if you're day one in-house is you assume that the data is fucked. And you assume that the processes are all out of whack and that experiments are not trustworthy. You go in and audit with those assumptions with your skeptic hat on, because it's almost always the case. Every company I've worked for has had some sort of data issues. And if you have data issues, then, well, one, you might not be getting accurate results, but two, you're also like voiding the trust that people feel in the results, which is actually a huge matter. Because like more than half the problem is organizational and getting buy-in for experimentation. Because you're going to be testing interesting things. They're not always going to accord to your brand style guidelines. There's going to be creative ideas that don't fit the strategy, which is the point of experimentation, because you're trying to cap the downside and unleash innovation in a controlled risk environment. So I think going in, cleaning up the data, making sure that you have baseline metrics, expectations, variance, all of that stuff set in place. If you have a method by which you can run controlled experiments, if you have a testing tool, and especially like deeming if it fits the cultural context of your company, that's important too. If you need to be doing like interesting partitioning of audiences and segments and personalizing different experiences, if you have multiple audiences, is Google Optimize the right tool? Maybe, but there might be a better one. So going in and identifying like what tools you have, what technology you have in place, figuring out if you're actually capturing qualitative research. Again, in almost all cases, you're either not doing that, or it lives in silos, or you're doing it in such a limited capacity that's it's not very useful. So going in and implementing things for specific questions like Hotjar polls or, winter copy tests or user testing is one of my favorite, implementing that stuff. And then I want to also say there's an organizational factor here that is true in almost every position, whether you're coming in as an SEO, whether you're coming in as an agency, a freelancer, whatever, that you also have to just introduce yourself and make sure that you're according to the company culture and strategy. Because if you're going off on your own path, you're not gonna the organizational immune system is gonna kick you out pretty quickly. So listening before acting is always important, which is part of the auditing process, by the way. That is actually just listening to what's currently being collected and done. And then this culminates in a plan. You don't want to like plan things too quickly. But once you've got your data in place, once you've got your roadmap set in terms of like test hypotheses from the qualitative research, then you start building the process. Then you start, building a prioritization matrix, a project management system, incorporating other teams, and coming up with SLAs or agreements, metrics, all that stuff. But that's how it would start, generally speaking.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like you're probably in the middle of all this stuff, right? Would you say that that's accurate? There's a lot of stuff that you need to get in place in order for experimentation to be successful. I think that everybody can relate to the data thing. When you say data, what do you mean? Like, so you're running experiments. What exactly do you mean by getting data in check? What are some of the things you look for? And maybe somebody who is a founder or somebody who's working at a company now can learn about maybe some processes that would help them get set up for experimentation faster, or they can just be more informed on what it is that you're exactly looking for.
Yeah, this is great. This is going to differ so much based on like what kind of company you work for. This is why like e-commerce is probably one of the easiest to work with, because Google Analytics is made for e-commerce sites essentially. So if you're working with e-commerce, you basically want to work backwards and ask what kind of information you need to make decisions. You might need more than you think in advance, which, anticipate some of that and work with an expert in analytics to kind of presume some of that stuff. But at a base level, you're going to need to make sure that your user session page view data is clean and accurate. It's not like double tracking sessions because you set up a bunch of UTM parameters that link to other internal pages on your website. You want to make sure that your conversion counts line up with your shopping cart or your CRM if you're in B2B. You want to make sure that you can track downstream metrics such as like average order value in the e-commerce context or repeat purchases. And in the B2B context, which is really, really hard, you want to make sure that you're enriching your data with sort of like the downstream stuff. So if you have like a sales-led process, like did they actually convert and become customers? If it's a product-led process, did they activate? Did they monetize? When? This is where cohort analysis comes in. But essentially, getting these baseline metrics in play so you can figure out what your conversion rates are and like where you want to go from there. Because if you don't have that information, like what are you optimizing really? You can still make good decisions based on qualitative data, even if you didn't have this stuff. But then you're not going to be experimenting. You're not going to be running like controlled A/B tests without that information. And then like there's so much more when it comes to data, like cleanliness, making sure that like, I don't know how technical you want me to go here. But
whatever you want, my friend.
It's like, you have query parameters that you need to clean up because you're running a bunch of paid campaigns, and that causes cardinality where you have thousands and thousands of rows for a single page, and it's very hard to aggregate that and get interesting information on a page basis. There's like cross-domain, subdomain level tracking issues. There's just like tons of, I would just say like data cleanliness and data integrity issues. And then there's the not must-haves, but like the wants. There's like, are you doing event tracking? Are you tracking like different goals and sort of like building goal funnels so you can, map the customer journey from a high, top of funnel page down to like that bottom funnel point where they're, considering purchase. But yeah, I would lead. I mean, it's really like on a need to know, on a like what information do I need, and then kind of working backwards to figure out how to get that.
Yep. That's like the holy grail. The first thing I hear, I work at a 6-person startup. The first thing I hear when I hear you talk about this, like this would be the data holy grail we're looking for to run an experimentation program. Where do you see people making the biggest mistakes when it comes to trying to implement an experimentation program? Because I think that everybody relates that data is just never going to be right at most places, or at least, most companies don't have their data just perfectly in check. If you're at a smaller company or maybe you don't have your data right, like how would you go about that problem? Would that be like, would you be thinking to yourself, let's try to get some quick wins on areas that I think are working properly? Or would you say, all right, let's hold back. Let's try to fix the data first and go through that process, even though it might be a little bit more painful and take more time before you get to maybe some experiment results? A lot of folks, I'm sure, are thinking, I would love to run experiments. Maybe I'm not sure if I would know that the results were right. How do you handle that? Because I'm sure you started at Workato, and I'm sure they have a phenomenal analytics team, so you're ahead of most folks. But most folks don't have their data in check. So how would you guide them through the process of getting to the first few experiments?
Well, I would say that way fewer teams and companies should run A/B tests than do, because there's a hype cycle built into it. Like you see these companies and case studies from companies like Optimizely, it increased conversion rates by like 10,000% or whatever. So you want to jump on that train and do the same thing, but it's just a feasibility matter. Not every company has enough traffic. Well, some companies have enough traffic to do A/B testing, but not to make it business-wise worth it. If you can only run one test a month, do you really think you're going to win every test? Like, probably not. You're probably going to go like 1 for 5 or 1 for 10, depending on how well optimized your user experience is to start. And in many cases, like startups are actually dealing with pretty good user experience best practices. So they're not usually there's usually not actually that much low-hanging fruit if you're at like a technology startup. That's granted, like there sometimes stuff forms and stuff, but as a matter of philosophy, I would say that you're probably best off just like mapping out the feasibility and the business case for it. Like on a best case scenario, if you win 2 out of 3 experiments and each win is 20%, which is absurd, that doesn't happen.
That would be nice.
Yeah, like how much is that worth to the business versus how much is the cost of the testing tool, the person to run these, the time, the opportunity cost, where you could be doing other more innovative and less incremental things. So I would say like 1, just question like why you're doing A/B testing and experimentation in the first place. 2, people are really loose with the definition of an experiment. So I think an experiment in many cases means something that's controlled, and you're trying to tease out some sort of causal factor, right? You're trying to see like why, or like maybe how much something won and like why, like what element specifically caused that. But I think other people use experiment very loosely in the sense that like, hey, we're trying something new. In that sense, fuck it, like do a bunch of new stuff. That's great. If you're talking about experiments in that sense, like everybody should, and startups should be doing it more than big companies because you're really trying to like tinker and see what works. And then third, I would say that I would actually heavily index on just decision quality, pre-vetting your decisions, going for high expected value items instead of just like random stuff. I think when you're booking.com, when you're Facebook, Google, you can test a lot of random stuff and actually go for discovery. You can basically, through data, see what you didn't expect to win. And in those cases, that's the best possible thing because you never would have tested it if you were thinking logically. But in the beginning, you don't have that luxury. So you're going to have to deal with qualitative research. You're going to come up with as much evidence as you can for ideas to be tested in the first place, and then put those forth and really ruthlessly prioritize in the beginning. So I would say don't even look at A/B testing tools if you don't have enough traffic. Just do some surveys and talk to customers and do winter messaging tests and all that stuff. Like you're going to get tons of insights there.
Yeah, shout out to the team over at Winter. I was checking that out. I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of people think about experiments and they think about running an A/B test with one image and a different image on this side and trying to sort of cobble through what that might mean. But oftentimes, I think the biggest experiments are just simple. It's like, what are you talking about? How many people are getting there? And how much friction, physical or cognitive, is there getting in the way from them realizing what the goal is that you're trying to get them to realize? That's basically the foundations of it, right?
Well, that's actually a good framework too, is that BJ Fogg behavior model, where it's like when you want somebody to take action, there's like motivation and ease. And if you can increase the motivation usually by copywriting or by different messaging and persuasion, then that's one lever you can pull, or it's just making it easier to get done. So if you remove form fields, if you remove steps, if you basically take out unclear messaging and make things more easy to understand, then that's also a lever. So if you just like look at it like from that paradigm or that framework, you barely, sometimes you don't even need like the qualitative tools. Sometimes you can just do that kind of backhand, and you can just understand what is feasibly easier to do by walking through the website yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this is probably a great transition. So we talked briefly about Omniscient. Could you tell us a little bit more about what Omniscient is and why you chose to start the company with David? Because you obviously have plenty of things on your plate, and you're pumping out content. I see it all over the place, and I'm like, damn, Alex, he's got some systems because he gets a lot of things done. Tell me a little bit more about Omniscient and kind of like why it exists and why like how you help companies grow faster.
Yeah, this is the bifurcation of my personal brand. So all the I try to keep these separate. It's difficult to do, and maybe eventually they're gonna have to merge. But I have my content marketing self and my experimentation self. So the content marketing self, I've been involved with content marketing for years, since the start of my career. Like even when I was doing internships, I was always kind of writing and doing blogging. Like I was a big fan of the Ryan Holiday, the Tim Ferriss, the just like the bloggers who built businesses on the backs of their pen. So I love that model. I obviously, Lawn Starter crushes it with SEO and content. CXL built their business on a blog, essentially. And so did HubSpot, by and large, right? Like that was the whole inbound marketing playbook that they made a name for themselves by. I've always been involved with it. I've done a lot of writing. I've done freelance writing. David Khim, my co-founder, also was doing freelancing. He's been involved, obviously, in a bunch of, he worked at Single Grain and then at HubSpot for many years. So he's seen kind of the insides of like very advanced content programs. And then, we were sitting at this conference. We were at a growth marketing conference in San Francisco. And my former boss at CXL Pep was there. and we were skipping the talks, having beers as we normally do. And it was with me and David, and he was explaining to us how hard it is to find a content marketer and how expensive the content marketing agencies he's looking at are. And David and I just looked at each other. We had actually talked a lot about starting a business together because both of us are kind of entrepreneurial minded and interested in building our own stuff. And we just looked at each other and we're like, we could do that. That's like, we could start this right now. Let's just do this. Because I got kind of tired of waiting for the right idea to come around, and I'm like, let's just build a revenue generating business. There's so many people out there who are like, agencies aren't a scalable business, or it's a bad margins. It's like, I don't know. It's not that bad of a business, honestly. It's fun to run. I get to work with great people, and I get to our clients are all badass. I'm enjoying it. So we started a content marketing agency. We focused on, actually, I think we differentiated, one, because we have great networks. So we started just reaching out to people in our networks and got our first clients that way. But David and I are both technical. I come from an experimentation background, and he comes from a product management background. So I think we really bring an interesting angle to content marketing outside of just here's some fluff. I didn't want to say fluffy writing, but here's some here's some pretty writing.
Yep.
You're gonna really like the quality of this article, and we're gonna drive some business results, and here's how we're gonna measure it. Here's how we're gonna model it and predict it and forecast it, and we treat it like a product or like a growth program. Like, we started out, I think our first headline was turn content into a performance channel or something like that.
Right.
And we still work with clients on that basis. We do last click attribution. We model things out beforehand. We track everything. It's very performance based.
Right.
So that's how we're that's where we're at. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, geez, how we got connected. I actually used to read your stuff, I think, on the CXL blog, and you were in town for Inbound, and I was like, I need to meet this dude. He's going deep on some concepts that, a lot of people just put out stuff. I was like, you can tell he cares when he writes about something. It's like a passion project more than just an assignment, right?
It's actually hard for me to let go sometimes, and I'm trying to do that because I want my personal blog to get bigger and more traffic, but I obviously have limited time. So I decided that I'm now hiring freelancers to write content, and I built a content roadmap report for my own site. But it was actually psychologically pretty difficult to let go and just be okay with publishing content.
Sure.
It's all it's not bad content, but it's not content that I would write necessarily. And there's this you kind of have to let the ego go sometimes too. It's the stuff that I write, I like it, but it takes me so long, and I'm such a perfectionist that it's becoming a bottleneck to actual growth. And I've done this with tons of things, actually, just psychologically, this purist trap. Before we launched a course, and it's doing pretty well, and it was fun to do. But before, in my mind, there was this idea that people who sell courses are scammy info marketers. And that's obviously not the paradigm anymore, because there's all these platforms like Teachable that are democratizing it. But in my mind, it was always the Tai Lopez or something like that. And I'm well, I don't want to be like that. But it's there's all these limiting factors in my mind. So the purist content stuff, I'm trying to let go of a little bit for better results.
Yeah, I mean, I also had the same kind of thoughts. And then I did Reforge, and that changed my perception of further education online. And if anybody's listening, definitely check that out, and also check out Alex's content as well.
CXL Institute too.
Yeah, it's pretty bomb.
Amazing
Yeah,
courses.
I mean, to get started today, to be good at your job and to get to whatever state you want, it's out there. Just about how hard you want to work, and how clear you are on what it is you want to do, right? So I think this whole story about how you started with marketing, went to growth marketing, now doing experimentation, all that became because you've been playing around in the lab, finding what you're passionate about outside of just your day-to-day work. You know what I mean? So you get exposed to things by taking on projects and not assuming too much out of them.
Well, I've done a ton of this, through the courses, obviously, working on the courses at CXL Institute and just reading a ton. But, sometimes I feel it's a little frustrating that there's so much out there, because you always feel behind. Or if you're like me, you do. So I'm always I'm not an expert in ABM. So, am I going to be employable in 2 years? So, there's always this anxiety there. And I don't know. I feel the next step for me is just all right, how do I spend less time just always trying to be ahead of the game? I feel that is not an entirely sustainable thing for your entire career, to just always be voraciously reading and consuming and all this stuff. Sometimes I want to just go out and kayak,
Well, you live in a beautiful area for kayaking, and you should spend as much time outside as possible. We're always under this looming threat in the digital world that things change. I mean, I just did an interview, a podcast with Kevin Indig yesterday about GPT-3 and the like influx of AI now in content, and how, again, things are just completely different. The world's changing every single day, and you just kind of have to accept that. It's not like, what am I going to do? It's like the world is going to change. The most difficult thing is like if you don't know what you want, you can get caught in these like information overload traps because everything's shiny and everything's new. I mean, the easiest way to get over those is just to go try stuff. If you find something interesting, actually go do it. Like sometimes doing the job is very different from what you read. If you're in marketing or if you're in growth or if you're in experimentation, running an experimentation program, I would imagine, I haven't done this full time, but doing it full time and like doing it at scale, there's probably a lot of things to that process that a lot of folks didn't consider. So I'm a big advocate of like learn the minimum that you need to possibly get into something, but then as soon as you feel at least reasonable that you could execute that thing, just go do it and get some muscle memory.
I love that. I would say that's probably a trap. Like this idea, like there's so much knowledge out there, and actually on the advanced fringes, like things get pretty marginal. And I feel like that's probably a trap you and I fall into because we go down these rabbit holes.
100%.
But you get into a career like SEO, and like really like what it comes down to, and this is obviously going to be simplified, and people are maybe going to get angry at this, but it's like links and content. Like those are the things that matter. And then if you know that, you just go start doing shit, and then you start to like pile on the marginal stuff. Like, all right, like, what is my, internal page rank, and like how can I sculpt that with internal links? And like there's all these, weird things there. But experimentation, it's similar. It's like, all right, how do I communicate this stuff, and how do I run trustworthy experiments? Like how do I get good ideas, and there's like these couple pieces. And then, instead of like reading all these like advanced books on like experiment design and sequential testing and non-inferiority tests, it's like, maybe let's get the basics in play first, and then if we need those things, we can go out and learn those things. But I do feel like I sometimes inundate myself with the fringe, the marginal stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like easy to go down the rabbit hole and like never apply it to any real world scenario. So I think that's why there's two things that are important. Number one is assuming you don't know a lot of things. I think that's really important when you're in an experimentation role, because you can get trapped in this kind of like reinforcement loop you get into where you see everybody doing the same stuff, and usually the breakout stuff is probably either the most simple or it's something that nobody has quite thought about because they're not getting exposed to things that are different from the world that they're in. And also just having frameworks, like there are people who have built these amazing experimentation programs at scale at some of the biggest companies in the world, and if you can level up and talk to people like Alex and read his content, you can learn what the fundamentals are fast and then deploy your creativity on top of those frameworks, because it'll help you put some systems around things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the idea on assuming you know very little. I like the epistemological humility. I think that's an interesting framework for anything, but especially experiments. You start to realize that even tests or ideas that you thought were highly certain, there's always a degree of uncertainty, even if, well, and especially if you A/B test them. A/B testing is a way to quantify your uncertainty. That's all it is.
For sure. Alex, where can people find you? Like, what do people need to walk away? If people heard this and said, wow, he's got a lot of big words, like I do every time we talk, where can they find more of those big words and find more about you, what you're working on, and kind of like if they need some advice on, testing, or they need some help with content marketing, like where can people find you?
Yeah, the best way to do it is alexbirkett.com. And then I'm writing a lot of blog posts there. I have a section where you can contact me with my email and all that stuff. And then I have a section with all my best articles, in my opinion. And then beomniscient.com is the agency website. So if you want content marketing services, or you want to read more of my content stuff, SEO and content stuff, that's over there. And other than that, I'm not really doing Zoom calls anymore. So if you're in Austin, just hit me up and we get tacos or a coffee.
Yes, if you'd like to go and play poker with myself and Alex at some point, we are going to be doing that at some point, and it's going to be fantastic. We're
going to go play poker and watch. Maybe we can find an emo band or something.
That would be the ultimate weekend, honestly. Just all I need, cold
tacos,
beer in Austin,
emo,
tacos,
beer,
and emo, and poker. That's it.
love it.
All right, Alex, thanks for joining, man. It was awesome having you. Everybody, connect with Alex. Looking forward to the next one. Peace.